The Puente Grande jail is the most heavily guarded prison in Mexico. It is famous for the enormous number of guards who are assigned to each prisoner. This is due to the fact that the prison was designed to house the most dangerous criminals in Mexico, including drug gang leaders. Here are some of the inmates that are currently being held there. Considering that these individuals are not your typical criminals, but rather the commanders of tens of thousands of armies and followers who are fully equipped with every possible weapon, it is always assumed that they would suddenly assault the jail. As a result, the walls of the prison were double fortified with thick concrete reinforced cement. Featuring the most robust form of steel watchtowers, highly armed guards, and checkpoints along the road leading to the jail, the prison was similar to a military camp. This was the prison where El Chapo was held captive. El Chapo is the most notorious and deadly drug lord in the history of Mexico and the globe. He is the Sinaloa cartel. It was called after the state of Sinaloa, which is where they originated. El Chapo, the head of the most dangerous drug gang in the world, had been hunted for a considerable amount of time and was finally apprehended in 1993 after a vigorous pursuit by the Mexican authorities, despite the fact that El Chapo was not a member of the Sinaloa state. This did not prevent him from running his empire from within the prison. He did it through bribery. He bribed every single officer and guard in prison with bribes worth millions of dollars, which provided him with comfort. He lived the life of a Cain while he was incarcerated. They provided him with alcohol, women, and all the food he desired. He also used to let his 2 wives and his mistresses visit him and stay with him for days. In addition, he had foams to keep his gang running from within the jail. The guy who made El Chapo's life easier the most inside the prison was this man, Damaso Lopez Damaso, who was the deputy chief of the prisons department. El Chapo bribed this guy to the point that he became his right hand. He gave him a home, a vehicle, presents, and a high income. This cemented their connection, and they became friends. Damaso was the primary reason El Chapo was able to escape from detention at Puente Grande jail. El Chapo was not only able to operate his gang throughout his time in jail, but he was also able to establish a new method for drug trafficking from inside the prison. This method was not his idea, but he and his associates came up with it. El Chapo was able to accomplish this because he felt completely comfortable within the prison, to the degree that he could do anything he wanted. His gang initiated a revolution in it, which is drug trafficking via tunnels. El Chapo engaged engineers, architects, and specialists to excavate tunnels at a professional level. It is evident that El Chapo was targeting the United States through this tunnel. It was the most lucrative site for them, and El Chapo and his gang, Sinaloa Cartel, no longer needed to transport narcotics by the air, sea, or land. Instead, they became smugglers through the use of the internet. Imagine that El Chapo's empire developed and thrived while he was in jail more than it did during the period that he was out of prison. Mexico did not extradite drug gang leaders like El Chapo to the United States. Subterranean tunnels that allowed them to increase the pace of smuggling as they started to generate $20 million each month. This was something that was continually being called for by S, who were the ones who were most impacted by the fact that a significant amount of narcotics had been imported into the United States. Since they have been persistently requesting the extradition of El Chapo and other criminals who are similar to him. The jails in the United States are more secure than those in Mexico, and they are also further distant from their gangs and the officers that they bribed in order to ensure that they would no longer have any control over their gangs. But the Mexican authorities were refusing to do so, claiming that they were able to handle their criminals. This made El Chapo feel relieved, because he was able to do whatever he wanted while he was incarcerated in Puente Grande prison. He had never considered the possibility of working for the Mexican government. Nevertheless, in the year 2001, the Mexican Supreme Court presented a proposal to create a new law that would permit the extradition of certain Mexican criminals to the United States of America. El Chapo felt threatened when he first learned about the new law of Mexican criminal extradition, and as a result, he immediately began making preparations for an escape, which must be accounted for. Carried out as quickly as possible a few weeks later, El Chapo had already formulated his solid plan and began to carry it out. El Chapo was already aware that only a few people should be involved in the plan, so he gave a huge bribe to his assistant Damaso and explicitly told him that he wanted to escape. Damaso replied and assured him that he would be able to escape. El Chapo negotiated with his buddy Damaso to lower the number of guards on January 19, 2001, which was the day El Chapo intended to escape. Of course, Damaso would not reduce the number of guards in the whole jail. Rather, he would reduce the number of guards in the part where El Chapo was being held. El Chapo also paid Damaso. One of the prison workers named Chito, this was one of the workers responsible for the laundry. His main task was to take the dirty clothes from the inmates and put them inside a cart that he took outside the prison and placed in a van that would take it to the laundry facility. Chito was the best choice for El Chapo because he was a normal worker. The day had finally arrived on January 19, 2001. Chito entered El Chapo's cell and assisted him in getting onto the laundry cart. He had been out of sight and had merely been doing his regular daily activities. None of the guards had any concern about him. The low number of guards in that sector allowed them to cover him with cloths and push the cart. They were able to do all of this without much difficulty. At one point, as Chito was moving the cart, he approached one of the prison gates where there was a guard. Chito stopped the vehicle and exited it to speak to the officer, accompanied the security officer, and requested that he open the gate. However, owing to El Chapo's weight, the cart started to roll backward on its own. At that precise time, El Chapo was terrified that the cart would strike the wall, turn over, and he would fall out, followed by them being exposed. However, his friend Chito was able to prevent this from happening. Instantly raced and ran behind the cart, holding it before it struck the wall. He then proceeded on his way regularly to the parking lots of the jail, where a vehicle was waiting for them. El Chapo promptly climbed into the trunk of the car, and they drove out of the prison. By the way, the car was driven by one of the inmates. The bride guards, for this reason, when they proceeded out of the jail exit gate, no one stopped them or even examined the automobile. They were allowed to go instantly. Despite the fact that the escape was shortly revealed, the chase was delayed, due of the bride guards. El Chapo was able to escape from jail because the bulk of the local police were in his pocket. They did not take immediate action, which allowed him to get away from the prison. After that, the federal police received the news of El Chapo's escape. In contrast to the local police, the federal forces started their investigation. The pursuit took place while El Chapo's men were waiting for him somewhere near the prison. When he arrived at their location, they changed his car and took him in an armored car to another location where a helicopter was waiting for them. Once he was inside the helicopter, they took him to another location where another armored car was waiting for him. They relocated him to 4 different locations in order to prevent him from being tracked. The last car that El Chapo took was in Mexico City, and while they were driving through the streets, El Chapo took a look around him and discovered that he was surrounded by police cars and motorcycles. He was so anxious and concerned that he asked the driver how they were able to track him down. His position. The driver told him that he had nothing to worry about since all of the police were really there for his protection. El Chapo took a deep breath and felt pleased the dishonest police were encircling him so that the real police couldn't reach. No one would ever expect that El Chapo would be escorted by that many police cars. They went alongside him until they reached one of the gang's safe houses. El Chapo's breakout in 2001 had made him a legend, to the point that most people began to think that he was above the law and untouchable, despite the fact that the Mexican government continued to protect him. Despite the fact that the authorities committed a significant amount of resources to the chase of El Chapo, they were unable to capture him. As a result, El Chapo remained at large for a period of 14 years. During this time, El Chapo was traveling between his hidden safe homes, the majority of which were located in remote sections of the highlands. El Chapo's gang growth and the territories they have gained control of in Mexico had reached an unparalleled level. Meanwhile, the Sinaloa cartel had become the greatest drug cartel in the world. Chapo's empire developed at an incredible rate, and he used to transport cocaine to the United States, which was worth billions of dollars yearly. It was so unchallenged that it was thought to be the biggest in history, exceeding the Medellin cartel, which was Escobar's cartel. Because it is difficult to achieve this degree of power, influence, and control without resorting to violence, the acts of violence that were committed were particularly mad. In the northern cities of Mexico, the cities that are bordered by the United States because they are used in drug trafficking, it was like a war. El Chapo and his gang turned these cities into war zones, causing a lot of killings that had never been seen before, and causing a lot of destruction. El Chapo was able to destroy all of the gangs one after the other, taking control of the entire country. Over the northern regions, this made him the largest and sole dominator of the drug trafficking movement from Mexico to America. The American and Mexican authorities wanted to arrest him at any cost, and in order to accomplish this mission, they utilized all of their most powerful resources in 2014. This mission took place in 2014, 14 years after El Chapo's escape. Using the assistance of its American counterpart, Mexican intelligence made the decision to follow a new approach, which consisted of locating the individuals who were closest to El Chapo, including his kids, spouses, and close associates. This was due to the fact that these individuals were the ones who knew El Chapo the best. Because of their innovative approach, they were able to get in touch with El Chapo's technical assistant. This young man was a Colombian in his 20s, and the intelligence service was able to persuade him to work for their benefit. With his assistance, they were able to break into the encrypted communication network that El Chapo and his gang were using. At this manner, they were able to determine his whereabouts and determine that he was at a home in Sinaloa, which is the headquarters of the gang. The house is one of El Chapo's safe houses. They were able to determine the location of the house, and it was precisely on February 17, 2014. Special forces from Mexico and agents from the Drug Enforcement Administration encircled the home and attacked it. The house was not like any other house. Behind the main door of the house was another steel door. The special forces continued to bash this door in an attempt to shatter it. When El Chapo was sleeping inside, his assistant suddenly entered his room and yelled at him, telling him that the Mexican army was at the door. El Chapo leaped out of bed when he heard the noises of the steel door being struck, and he began to move the door. El Chapo was able to escape the Mexican army. The forces that were located outside the house were able to see movements through the windows. They noticed that there were people moving inside, so they increased the amount of force that they were applying to the door. The windows were also fortified, and the entire house was armored. Additionally, the windows were small, which made it difficult to enter the house. After they had entered the house with their weapons raised, they ordered all of the people who were inside to surrender and lie down on the ground. However, they were surprised when they discovered that no one was inside the house. Through them, all of their attention and efforts were focused on the door. They continued to beat the door until it was broken. They searched every single room and every corner of the house, but no one was there, although they saw shadows moving inside the house when they were outside. Where did El Chapo go when his assistant entered the room to alert him? El Chapo got up from his bed and went immediately to the bathroom, not to hide, but rather to escape down a tunnel. El Chapo's gang has grown professional and has skill in creating tunnels, not only for the purpose of importing drugs, but also for the purpose of fleeing all of their safe homes, every single one of which had subterranean tunnels, in case the house was surrounded by the police. El Chapo. would immediately flee the house. Without any difficulty, El Chapo was able to escape through a tunnel that was dug under the bathtub. This is a real image of the tunnel after it was discovered by the Mexican authorities. The entrance of the tunnel was cleverly designed so that no one would find out about it unless he knew about it. In order to open the secret entrance, a pin must be used. Be inserted into a tiny aperture behind the bathroom mirror, which would result in the creation of an electric current that would unlock the lock that was holding the vafta. After that, the vafta would need to be lifted by hand, and the bathtub would be raised easily thanks to the hydraulic arms that were supported from beneath when El Chapo performed the operation. Entered the tube, he removed the bathtub and shut it behind him. As a result, the storming troops took their time investigating the home until they found the hidden entrance. El Chapo was able to escape with his wife, his assistant, and his chef via the tunnel, and by the time the special agent arrived, they had all made their escape. El Chapo and those with him had already disappeared when the forces discovered the entrance to the tunnel. El Chapo made the decision to go to a normal place, a place where nobody would think he would be there. Instead of going to one of his isolated safe houses, he went to a coastal city called Mazatlan, which is a touristic city, and no one would think he would be there. Expect that he might be there, but what El Chapo didn't know was that his communication network had been hacked. The Mexican authorities found his safe house, from which he escaped by coincidence, but he didn't know that they might find him wherever he went. 5 days after he escaped from the safe house. The date of his escape from the safe house was exactly February 22, 2014. The location of El Chapo was at one of the major hotels called Miramar, where Mexican officials and the American agency were able to quickly surround him and capture him in his room. The photograph that is attached is a true picture of him at the time of his arrest. He did not have any security or guards, and he was arrested. Didn't anticipate that they would be able to easily identify his location, because he basically didn't know how they were tracking him or that his phone had been hacked. After El Chapo's second arrest, they took him to Altiplano prison, which is a maximum security prison and the most fortified prison in Mexico. You might be wondering why they didn't take him to Altiplano prison. It is for the simple reason that El Chapo was arrested for the first time in 1993, that you should bring him to this jail for the first time. At that time, Altiplano prison had only just been created, and it was not nearly as well defended as it should have been. The exterior wall of this jail is encircled by a significant number of watchtowers, and each tower is staffed by 3 or 4 armed guards with guns. In 2014, when El Chapo was caught for the second time, this prison was similar to a military camp owing to the volume of guards, weaponry, and equipment that was contained inside it. Heavy weapons, despite the fact that the prison walls are nets, they are doubled in 2 layers, and in some prison areas, they are even doubled in 3 layers. This net fence is constructed and reinforced by heavy concrete with a full meter of thickness. There were even ditches. All of these fortifications were designed to prevent any external attack. As was mentioned earlier, the criminals who were incarcerated had special armies, which meant that they had to be prepared for any attack from the outside. They even have armored vehicles inside the prison. In addition to the fact that the entire prison area is protected by a no-fly zone, there are sources that claim that they have anti-aircraft weapons in preparation for any potential attacks from the outside. Any air attacks, not to mention the broken communication networks in the entire prison area, which means that all mobile phones would not work inside the prison. And the most important thing is that the officers and guards in this prison are carefully hired to prevent any and all forms of bribery, despite the fact that the prison was home to some of the most notorious criminals and gang members. There were no leaders in Mexico who were able to escape until El Chapo arrived. As soon as El Chapo entered the jail, he started thinking about ways to escape since he was frightened of being extradited to the United States at any time. This was due to the fact that the cell phones were not functioning properly. The only way he was able to connect with the outside world while he was incarcerated was via the persons who were permitted to visit him in jail. These visitors consisted of two individuals. The first was his attorney, Scar Lopez, and the second was his third wife, Ema Cornell, who was his young wife whom he had married. Beginning in 2007, when she was 32 years younger than him, El Chapo started coordinating with his wife in order for her to deliver his instructions to his children and followers. His 4 children were all leaders in his gang, but following his arrest, none of them were able to continue their leadership roles. One of them became leadership of the gang El Chapo, and he had another guy who was not a part of his family, but whom he believed to be his right hand. This man was Damaso Lopez, who was the deputy head of security at Punta Grande Jail, and the corrupt official who enabled El Chapo to do anything he wanted in that prison. It was noted before that Damaso and El Chapo were friends, which is why El Chapo requested Damaso to join the gang during the course of the year 2001. Damaso was sacked and was unable to find a work following El Chapo's escape in 2001. Damaso was accused and labeled an accomplice. After El Chapo's second incarceration, Damaso went from being a prison security officer to being the boss of the most powerful drug cartel in the world. Damaso continued to advance his position inside the gang over the course of several years, eventually becoming El Chapo's right hand in the gang and the commander of the gang. Now El Chapo started communicating with his right hand Damaso and his children from within the prison through his wife. He also began moving them so that they could get him out of prison as quickly as possible before his extradition to the United States. El Chapo's children began to do this because he was really afraid of Damaso. Putting together a strategy to free their leader from prison, Damaso, who had previously worked as a security official in one of the most heavily guarded prisons in Mexico, has an advantage in terms of planning because he is familiar with the security system that is used in prisons. On the other hand, El Chapo, who was incarcerated, spent the majority of his time in his cell throughout his time there. He was only permitted to leave his cell for 1 hour a day. There was a GPS tracker connected to his ankle at all times. His cell was under monitoring 24 hours a day. There were cameras inside his cell, and the shower was hidden behind that little wall, all with the purpose of providing him with some solitude. El Chapo was aware that it was a violation of his rights. It was nearly impossible for him to escape from this prison, but he was determined to do so at any cost. Since we are discussing El Chapo and his gang, it is obvious that a tunnel would be a part of the plan. However, the question is how they would dig it and where they would start digging it. The beginning of the digging wouldn't be from inside the prison. The tunnel must be dug from outside the prison. Be dug outside the prison, leading inside the prison. This may be the first time in history we always hear about prisoners digging a tunnel to escape from prison, but it is almost impossible for a prisoner and his followers to dig a tunnel for him from outside the prison. The first step of the plan is to purchase a piece of land or a piece of land that is located outside the prison. Land that is near enough to the jail that they could dig a tunnel that connects to the prison, but at the same time, it shouldn't be closed in a way that draws attention. The problem lay in the fact that the Altiplano jail was situated in a remote area and was bordered by enormous agricultural spaces. After an exhausting search, El Chapo's gang was able to locate an empty construction site approximately 1.5 kilometers away from the prison. It was most likely used by farmers, and it resembled an unfinished building. The prison was a massive facility that was located in the middle of a vast area of agricultural land, and there were no buildings in the surrounding area. They bought this land and registered it in the name of a person who was not suspicious. The land became theirs, and they now had a starting point from which they could begin digging. However, since the cell is under heavy surveillance, it is not that simple for them to know exactly where El Chapo's cell is located. Even if they were to know the exact location of the cell, it would be difficult for them to do so. because the only blind spot is that small shower behind the small wall. The only place where the tunnel exit should be is that little shower square. About how could they dig an underground tunnel from outside the prison with almost a blind spot? They are able to dig the tunnel and reach the cell. How would they get him out without being exposed? The only blind spot is that small shower. To reach the cell itself is a big accomplishment, much alone to reach that particular little location. To solve this difficulty, El Chapo got 1.5 kilometers in length without seeing anything and opening precisely in that small place. The plan appears impossible to reach the cell itself. The idea was simply to smuggle a GPS to him, which he would then put in that shower space so that the men digging the tunnel could easily identify the exact location the idea was based on. The idea was inspired by the GPS tracker that was on his ankle. The idea was brilliant because it would help his men identify the location of his cell and exactly that small space behind the wall. Ideal. But the difficulty was sneaking the GPS device Altiplano was the most defended prison in Mexico, and it was very impossible to smuggle anything into the jail. There were several checkpoints both inside and outside the prison that needed to be passed without being exposed, and they wouldn't let anyone through. Allow the passage of any equipment that might be used to escape or as a weapon. El Chapo came up with another brilliant plan. He requested his wife to inform the gang to place the little GPS device in a watch so that it could pass through all of the checkpoints. In a normal situation, his wife would be able to sneak the watch to him without any difficulty. Suspected that it was just a regular watch that wouldn't cause any problem, or rather that's what the guards believed via the watch and the GPS device. El Chapo's men managed to discover the precise position of that specific area behind that tiny wall. El Chapo's men had already begun the process of digging towards the prison, but when they got the exact location, they knew how to point the digging 100% in the right direction. As we mentioned earlier, they were experts in digging tunnels, so the tunnel that they dug was astounding, and the engineering work that they did at all levels was professional. Once you enter the 10-meter deep tunnel, you will realize that the tunnel was not just an ordinary escape tunnel. Rather, it was meticulously built and is without a doubt the best escape tunnel. The entrance to the tunnel began at the building, and if you take a look at the opening of the tunnel, you will notice that there are a large number of wooden supports. Ever constructed in the history of prison breakouts, such a tunnel required a large number of workers. It is estimated that there were between 10 and 12 people working non-stop on that tunnel. To begin, they needed a ventilation system, so they laid ventilation pipes along the kilometer that they dug, and an air pumping machine was placed at the entrance of the tunnel. They also needed lighting, so they hung thousands of light bulbs along the tunnel, and there was also an electricity generator at the entrance of the tunnel. It was hidden, and they made it look like a cement grilling table. They managed to conceal everything, so nothing was exposed or visible from the outside of the brick building. The scale of this operation was insane, with thousands of meters of ventilation pipes, thousands of lamps, and tons of sand being used. This was necessary in the event that the security or guard suddenly searched, as they would not be able to discover what was going on below unless they conducted a thorough inspection. This was crucial because they were located somewhat close to the prison. Extracted from underground, they removed them and disposed of them without exposing them, which is especially remarkable considering that they were located 1.5 kilometers away from the prison, and the ground was level and empty. It is peculiar that none of the guards, particularly those on the watchtowers, had noticed them, which is evidence that El Chapo's gang was responsible for their disappearance. The gang had meticulously planned for this operation and had taken all of the necessary precautions. In addition, they had constructed a railroad inside the tunnel on which they had placed a customized excavation cart that appeared to be integrated with a motorcycle. This was done with the intention of transporting the sand and, later on, assisting their leader in escaping. Throughout the whole process of digging, El Chapo was concerned and apprehensive because he was frightened of being extradited to the United States. As a result, he was constantly writing letters to his men, asking them to explain why the digging process was taking so long. All of the time, they responded by saying that the problem was not as straightforward as they had first thought. Planning an effort, and they should be meticulous in what they were doing. Finally, in June of 2015, El Chapo received news from his men that the tunnel was almost ready. El Chapo chose the 4th of July 2015 as the day of his escape. Why did he choose the 4th of July? Because he wanted to insult America. July 4th is a national day in the United States of America. He meant to send an insulting message to them. By this deed, he wanted to inform them that he managed to escape on the day of their joy. El Chapo had a strong hate for America, despite the fact that all of his money came from other countries. The anniversary of Independence Day was a significant day for the Americans. Since of this, he was aware of how much they want him, and he was also aware that the American authorities were constantly requesting that the Mexican authorities extradite him. Unfortunately, his men were unable to make it to the tunnel, and since it still required maintenance, they were forced to postpone the operation until a later time. A week later, finally, the big day had arrived. The day of El Chapo's breakout, which took place on July 11th, 2015, the day on which El Chapo would get out of the jail where he had spent over 16 months. This video footage comes from the security cameras that were in his cell on that night, and El Chapo was monitoring them. Every time he got up from his chair and went about the room waiting for a signal from his guys around 8 o'clock, El Chapo sat on the edge of his seat, watching a comedy series on his little tablet with the volume turned up. He was attempting to cover the noises that his men were making while they were trying to open the hole. Bed put his shoes on and went to the shower space, which was the only hidden place from the surveillance cameras in the entire cell. Since that time, El Chapo has vanished. El Chapo entered the opening and went down through a ladder to the underground tunnel, where he met with his wife's brother, who advised him to go to the shower space cart and asked him to get on it. El Chapo got on the cart and drove it as fast as he could along the tunnel. When he reached the other side of the tunnel, he went up to the brick building where a quad bike was waiting for him. He rode it with one of his men and went on the other side of the tunnel. The guards in the prison took him for a ride. 40 minutes to discover the escape. They noticed on the surveillance cameras that El Chapo wasn't in his cell. They went immediately to check on him. At first they thought that he might be hiding behind that shower wall, but they were shocked when they found the opening of the tunnel. The sirens immediately blared, declaring a state of alert, but it was not found to be the entrance to the tunnel. It was too late at that point. El Chapo had already gone a considerable distance. He then arrived at a large truck, got into the truck trailer, and his men securely closed it so that they would not be seen. The truck then proceeded for approximately 2 hours until it arrived at a town called San Juan, which is located in an area of the island of Puerto Rico. After that, El Chapo boarded a private plane, the pilot of which was one of the most trusted individuals in his whole gang. This time, El Chapo took all of the required measures, not leaving anything to chance. There were 2 jets, the first of which would transport El Chapo to his destination, and the second would fly in order to deceive anyone who might be pursuing him. El Chapo made the decision to go hide in one of his safe houses, which was similar to a castle and was situated in the mountains of Sinaloa. It was the most secure and fortified location for El Chapo, and they used to refer to the sky as El Chapo's escape. It caused the Mexican authorities a great deal of embarrassment because, just a year ago, they boasted about his arrest in front of the world, believing that it was the greatest achievement in the war against drugs and crime. The Mexican authorities have utilized a significant portion of their forces and resources in order to hunt down El Chapo at any cost. However, if El Chapo had only kept his word, they would have been able to accomplish their goal. It would have been difficult for the authorities to track El Chapo if he had been hiding in his secret houses in the mountains. However, El Chapo continued to move from one city to another, visiting his gang headquarters, meeting his followers, and giving them orders. This was very important for him to maintain his control and leadership over the gang, but it also put him in danger, made his tracking easier, particularly because the Mexican authorities were supported by the Americans, who fully cooperated in El Chapo's case. The American authorities provided the Mexicans with a wide variety of newly developed technologies for tracking and monitoring the Mexican intelligence with the assistance of the Mexican government. Of the Americans were able to find a residence in Los Mochis, which is a city located in the northern part of Sinaloa state. Within this house, the intelligence team saw that there was a movement by El Chapo's gang. They began eavesdropping on them and discovered that they used the term El Chapo to use the term grandma to refer to a particular individual. For instance, they say, "Grand Mud is coming," which means, "Get ready for grandma." It is evident that they encountered a specific individual by this nickname, which looked to be significant, and the intelligence team feared that it may be El Chapo himself. On the following day, a convoy consisting of 3 cars arrived, and it became immediately apparent that this convoy was intended for a significant individual. The first time the cars arrived, they entered the garage directly, and the agents who were monitoring the location were unable to identify the individual who was inside the car. As a result, the Mexican intelligence agency continued to listen in on the conversation, on their calls and monitoring the residents for a length of time, during which they were virtually certain that El Chapo was inside the house. This was verified after hearing his voice, or what resembled to be his voice, by eavesdropping on their calls. In addition, such preparations and monitoring were carried out. On the morning of January 8, 2016, 6 months after El Chapo's escape, Mexican troops made the decision to attack the home. A group of special troops encircled the location, supported by DEA agents, and raided the house. El Chapo was the only person who would be protected by these forces. After that, a severe armed struggle broke out between them and El Chapo's supporters. The conflict was ferocious, and all of its casualties were members of the gang. As for the special forces, several of them were hurt, but nobody died as a result of their methodical and well-prepared assault. Once the struggle had finished, they didn't locate El Chapo. He fled for the second time via an underground tunnel. This mirror was a hidden entrance that led to the underground tunnel. El Chapo escaped through the tunnel as his supporters were battling against the special forces. He escaped. With one of his close assistants, when they came out of the tunnel, they stole a car that was passing on the street. The security forces weren't only surrounding the house, they were spread out in the whole area. When they received the news of El Chapo's escape, patrols started roaming the area right away. About 20 kilometers away from the residence, at one of the checkpoints, 4 federal police officers were able to successfully capture El Chapo and his aide. El Chapo immediately tried to pay them, but unfortunately for him, they were not corrupt policemen, and they denied his offer. Because of this, he became enraged and began to behave in an erratic manner. He started insulting and threatening them, but the officers ignored his threats and snapped a photo of him. They then forwarded the image to their commander, who informed them that special forces were on their way to them and warned them. El Chapo's soldiers and associates were preparing for an assault by assembling all of their troops to rescue their leader. He also instructed them to seek shelter in a nearby hotel and make ready for any unexpected possible attack from El Chapo's gang. El Chapo, along with 4 policemen, took the motel as their place of refuge. One of the motel rooms where they waited and observed the situation. After a short time, they started to hear the noises of automobiles arriving from a distance, as if it were a vast procession moving slowly towards them. At that point, El Chapo smirked cruelly and remarked to the cops, "Now, you probably have to deal with the issue. I really wish you had taken me up on my offer," but his grin suddenly transformed into a look of sadness. As the parade of automobiles approached, he was overcome with astonishment and sorrow when he discovered that they were not his troops, but rather a large number of other guys. The hotel was surrounded by troops from the army and special forces that they had assigned. The guys working for El Chapo were taken aback when they rapidly guarded all of the entrances and exits. Once they noticed the large number of security personnel stationed in the area, they were unable to even consider the possibility of going any closer to the hotel. El Chapo was taken into custody for the third time and was once again brought to the Altiplano institution, the very same jail from which he had previously escaped. But this time, El Chapo was facing significant challenges. Despite the fact that he was under observation, suppose that he started looking for an alternative path out. Began to make preparations for an escape operation, he sent signals to his gang, requesting that they carry out the operation once again. It was reported by a few members of El Chapo's crew that they had already begun working on a fresh escape plan, and what made them so successful was that they had. It was strange that they intended to carry out the strategy in the same manner that the Mexican government had already been doing. While working on the processes for his extradition to the United States, they had come to the conclusion that this was the only answer that El Chapo could find: evaded capture in the year 2001 of Puente Grande. Having evaded capture for a period of 14 years, when they encircled him at one of his safe homes, he also managed to escape down a tunnel that was located under the bathtub. Escape from Altiplano jail, which is the most heavily guarded jail in Mexico, and make their way to the... What is the length of time that they will continue to pursue him if he goes through the tunnel behind the mirror in another safe house for the fourth time? If he continues to reside in Mexico, he will undoubtedly discover a means of evading capture, since all of his troops and supporters are concentrated in the United States. Due to the fact that he would no longer be able to accomplish anything, the court was expediting all of his proceedings. His extradition processes are based on the assumption that the judge who was working on his extradition case had been murdered. Throughout the month of October in 2016, it had been decided to delay El Chapo's extradition to the United States for 1 year. After some time had passed, but ultimately, on a day in January 2017, El Chapo was taken aback when the military personnel and security personnel entered his cell, bound him, and transported him to a helicopter. It was taking place in the yard of the jail. He was then transported to a special aircraft, and he had not yet grasped what was taking place aboard the plane. The aircraft arrived in New York, and El Chapo stepped out of it while attempting to make sense of what was happening. While El Chapo was gazing around to the right and left, he was perplexed by what was occurring. He questioned one of the DEA officers about it. The agent responded by saying, "You are in New York, and this is a picture of the most important person in the world." With tears in his eyes, El Chapo, the most powerful drug gang leader in history, was put on trial in the United States. This was a momentous occasion. During the lengthy trial, which lasted for a considerable amount of time, several witnesses, and El Chapo was ultimately condemned to life in jail in 2019, and testimony finally emerged. In addition to 30 years, El Chapo is presently being held in a facility known as ADX, or Florence Supermax, is the most powerful jail in the United States of America, and it is situated in the state of Colorado. As well as a safe jail in the United States, it contains convicts who are considered to be particularly dangerous. To the other detainees, which implies that all of the convicts are confined in solitary confinement, and even their relationship with one another is restricted. Having a restricted amount of time with the guards, El Chapo spends 23 hours every day in his. He's only permitted to leave his cell for a period of 1 hour to travel to indoor locations inside the jail. and he is subject to intense and stringent monitoring. I have a strong belief that El Chapo has tears in his eyes, but I am quite convinced that he has taken into consideration escape on several occasions. We have reached the conclusion of our narrative when he comes to the realization that he is a great distance away from all of his power and influence. I appreciate you viewing, and I hope you'll remember to give it a like and subscribe to more videos.